This conference will now be recorded.
Give about 30 seconds just to make sure we got everything set up here, and we'll get started. You have the PowerPoint you want to go ahead and pull up. Do the share screen now.
Yeah, I can do that. Need to be a presenter.
You should be able to present.
I should start, I'm sorry.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for those who are attending today. We are recording this webinar. For those who cannot attend, we will post this shortly on our website, as well as the material that we're going to discuss today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is David Dharma. I'm the Executive Director of the Commission for Transportation Disadvantaged. I'm very pleased to introduce the Thomas Howell Ferguson team here. They will be doing majority of this presentation today. So I'm going to go ahead and just get us started and kind of introduce this topic. This really is unlike what we've been doing the last few workshops. This is really more of a technical training level type of subject. We're not going to be covering any major substantive policies or future commission agenda items. This is really more getting into the mechanics and our process when it comes to the reimbursement to invoice of our trip and equipment grant. But we do still want to gather feedback. This is sort of an introduction and a tutorial to this new template that we're going to be discussing. But we do want to get feedback from folks who are attending this, as well as those we'll ask at the end of the webinar. For those who have additional thoughts, they can send me an email or send one of our project managers an email, and we can continue the dialogue in the future. But to introduce the topic, most of you should be aware that about 3 years ago, the Commission implemented a new template that we use today now with all of our trip and equipment grant invoices across the state. The reason why we went to this template was because when we were originally collecting invoices from the CTCs, they were a kind of a mix across the board. We had different variables captured. It wasn't consistent in format across the systems. And so as a result of it, this was a way to make our process in terms of reimbursement and finance much more streamlined, much more consistent, and auditable. But now that, as many of you know, we have moved, we've started to transition into now a new allocation formula where our invoice data is going to take another component now. It goes beyond just the reimbursement, but also now we're looking at it from the way we allocate our dollars year to year, and also our performance. When we look at our annual performance report, in addition to what we've talked about with the annual operating report, we want to start bringing in the trip and equipment grant invoice data into those discussions, into those reporting to the governor and the legislature every year. And so this seminar today, the webinar today, is really designed to introduce some new features to what we're bringing in to help improve our process of collecting the data, analyzing the data, but also, I think importantly, and this is what I think we want to get from y'all, is to make our process more efficient, meaning having less back and forth occurring between the project managers and the CTC, trying to reduce the inconsistencies or the errors, which can be very time consuming and delay the process of getting paid. So we do hope that this is a mutual a benefit for both our team in terms of streamlining and collecting the data, but also for the CTCs out there in terms of their process of getting submitting the invoice and getting reimbursed as quickly as possible. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Casey Perkins, who will be leading this presentation with a tutorial on the new invoice template.
All right, thank you, David. All right, so really I have in terms of going through the new template and all that, I have a short PowerPoint and I have the template itself in Excel. So I'll kind of just go through that. Hold on. I can't. Oh, there we go. All right, so I'm just going to start with the current invoice template and what I think are really just three kind of big facts about it. As David really just mentioned at the end of his introduction, the purpose is to establish uniform procedures, make things more standardized and consistent. That was the original idea behind it. It's submitted to CTD as a Microsoft Excel workbook, and then it's comprised of three main parts. There's the trip invoice form, which is the first tab in the Excel workbook. There's the trip summary data report, which is the second tab in the workbook. And then there's the detailed trip data reports, which are individual tabs, as you'll see there, that follow the first two tabs, ambulatory, wheelchair, etc. So in terms of the new invoice template, what's different about it? Well, in terms of these three big takeaways, in terms of the first, we're not really changing the purpose. And in fact, I would say the real motivation here is to enhance, the faithfulness to this purpose. It still is submitted to CTD as a Microsoft Excel workbook. So the file format is the same. And then the last part about it having three components at a high level, we're actually keeping it that way. So it's going to look really identical for the most part to what you've already been using up to this point. So what is changing about it? So as I said before, it's really not the way it's presented. It's not the outline. It's not the look. The idea is to really do things in the background that make it easier and more straightforward to submit the accurate data. And so what's an example of an error that can occur in that situation? Well, sometimes you have to enter the number of miles and trips in the trip invoice tab, as well as the trip summary tab. And then you got to list all the trips, say, in the ambulatory tab. And, that's three different instances where you're having to input data. And you could easily make an error in that situation. So we look at things like that, where can we just have you input it one time and it's consistent across all those tabs. So that's really all we're doing here. So let's go to the first one, the trip invoice tab. On the table here, it's really just a list of the current fields there. And the ones that are bold and underlined here are the ones where we're making changes. So in terms of the invoice number, you don't have to input that anymore. It's now going to be automated. In terms of the dates of service, you don't have to input it, type into it anymore. It's actually going to have a drop-down selection where you choose the month. For the type of service provided, that's going to be automated as well, so you don't need to input that. The unit type, also automated. The unit type, in terms of whether you do a trip or a mile, it'll just have a drop down for that. And then the number of units will also be automated. So I'm going to exit my PowerPoint real quick, and I'll just go to the template. And what we've done here, yeah, I'll blow it up. Sorry. Bear with me. Or do I just need to,
Actually, yeah,
do you think it's,
they can blow it up by just
okay.
hovering over it. And
Yeah, well, I'll just kind of scroll down here. But what we've done here is with this trip invoice tab, anything that really requires input on anybody's part really is shaded in a light blue. So, you know, the name of your counties, the name of your CTC, your address, zip, city, all that stuff. The actual date that you submit the invoice, the grant number, the monthly disbursement amount. This is what I was talking about for the dates of service. So now you can actually just select what the dates of service are. Down here, you know, as we mentioned, the types of services provided are automated now. In terms of the types of trips moving forward, there's going to just be 4 types of trips: ambulatory, wheelchair, stretcher, and group per passenger. So the only thing you really need to do here is say whether the unit type is a trip or a mile, and then enter the rate. Things like the number of units and the subtotals will be automatically calculated. And we'll kind of see how this works later on, but the day or the bus passes, or if you have them, any of them, they'll be automatically populated here as well. And the unit type can only be a pass there, so you don't need to do anything. At the very bottom, everything is self-calculating. The only thing is really the amount to be recovered from previous billing. So that's the trip invoice tab. Again, you only have to fill in the things or select things that are shaded in blue. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. So the trip summary tab, there's actually nothing you need to do on this anymore. It's going to be entirely automated. The totals for the trips, miles, any passes you may have are automatically calculated and pulled from the detailed trip data report tabs. So these same totals will also feed into the trip invoice tab that we just looked at. So you will no longer have to enter those things. That really touches on the example we mentioned earlier about those counts being consistent across all the different tabs in the workbook. Instead of actually entering the numbers, it'll actually just count, or it'll count the miles, it'll count, you know, the actual number of trips, the actual number of bus passes based on the data you enter. So I'll just go to that real quick. There's not much to really do there because there's nothing for you to do, but everything on this now is completely automated. There's nothing you need to input, is the idea. Going back. All right, so the actual trip data report tabs. This is where a lot of the background stuff is happening. And this is where the most significant changes are happening in the template. Once again, you know, we have a list of the current fields that you really have for, and we're doing trips before we do passes here. But you have a list of the fields right there on the left in terms of the things you currently have to fill out. We're actually keeping all of them. The only one we're removing is the cost column. And the reason we're doing that is, you know, it's really only needed in that first tab, the trip invoice form. But the 2 big things here to keep in mind are the date of service, as well as the pickup time and the drop-off time. These are fields where, in going through the invoice data and doing analysis, where we found the most errors. The other stuff's actually pretty straightforward. You know, in terms of whether it's the customer name, the mode, the origin address or destination address, the origin city or destination city. We really just are looking at whether or not there's any text there. So if there's a blank, then that's an issue, an error we want to avoid. But miles too, we just want to make sure it's a positive number. So, and I'll show this right now, but really, if any of these things on the right are not done correctly, they're not going to be counted in the trip summary tab, and by extension, they're not going to be counted in the trip invoice tab. But wherever there's a mistake, that entire row for that trip is going to be highlighted in yellow so that your attention can be raised immediately. You know, we're not trying to be sneaky or tricky here. So let's just go ahead and look at that. And what I'm going to do is, this is just some made up data I have for, I did a Latcho account, but again, it's just made up data. And I'm going to copy and paste it into the new template because I have a feeling a lot of you do some copying and pasting into the template. And I'll just paste it into the ambulatory tab. And we'll go to the trip summary. We've got 946 ambulatory trips and 11,390 miles. Because we're counting trips, we've got 946 units. If it had been miles, it would be the 11,390. So let's do an example of the yellow highlighted row. Going back to that real quick. One second. Okay. Are we good?
Yes.
Okay. So for the date of service, this is one of the big ones where we've seen some, errors in this field more often than some others. It has to be in a date format, and it has to be within the dates of service that you selected in the trip invoice form. So in this particular case, we've selected August 2021. So if I just change it to say July here, so it's the wrong month, and we look at that, the whole row gets highlighted yellow. And you'll see that, remember, we had 946 trips before. It's not counting the trip anymore. And we had 11,390 miles before. Apparently this trip had 7 miles associated with it. I'll go back and look. Or 6 miles perhaps. So whenever you copy and paste, if you have an error anywhere, it'll highlight a yellow like this. And you can either, copy and paste again, or you can go ahead and just fix it while it's in there. In terms of, we'll go through these one by one now. So for the name, again, as I said, it's just looking for text. So if you accidentally left it blank, it'll highlight a yellow. Same thing with the mode there. So the pickup time needs to be in the time format. And this is interesting. If you'll actually look up here at the bar, it's actually a date and time format. It can be either one. It doesn't really matter. But if I make an error here, right, let's say I say PMP instead of PM, it won't recognize that format. So same thing, it's going to take this trip out, 945 trips. All right, I'll just undo that. So once I correct it, I've got 946 trips now. Origin address, origin city. Just like name, it's just looking for text, that's all. So even if there's a misspelling, it's not gonna highlight that and not count it. Drop-off time works exactly like pickup time. Destination address and destination city work exactly like origin address and origin city. And then the miles, it's gotta be a number. So if I say 6 instead of the number 6, highlights it, not counting, well, I'll have to fix that, but I don't know what happened there. Or if it's negative, same thing, won't count it. Let's go back here. So that's really that. Let's go to the passes real quick. And with the passes, it works very similarly. It's just fewer fields. You have the date of your pass distribution, customer name, bus pass number, cost and mode. we're removing costs from this as well. It's duplicative of the trip invoice form, so that one's removed. And then really the date's the same thing, so it must be in the date format and within the dates of service. And then the other fields that are remaining, they're just, you know, they're just going to be looking for text. And we'll go through that one real quick here. So I just have a couple here, but you know, same thing. So if I say July accidentally instead of August, oh, so what happened there? I'll actually do that example actually in a second. Let's just change the year. Forgot about that. Computer's a little slow. So highlighted, so you'll see there's two passes right here, right? But it's only counting one pass because of that one error. And then there's just the one pass on this tab. I'm going to go ahead and change this and show you how it automatically figures out the passes. So change the date there. Now let's like have two different types of passes, but it's really, I mean, it can go up to a pretty high number of different passes. I'm just going to keep it simple for this demonstration. So, oh, I got to change the year. I forgot about that. So now you'll see it's automatically picked up that there's two different kinds of passes and there's one of each. Same thing for here as well. So that's how the passes work. Let's go to really, this is kind of the last point before we'll allow for discussion and feedback. So what about situations, and this is very rare based on the invoice data that I've looked through, but sometimes a CTC will wish to take back a trip that they submitted on a previous invoice from a previous month. So how do we allow for that to happen? Well, if it's a previous month within the same state fiscal year for the bus passes like you were just looking at, it'll automatically count it as a negative credit. For the trips, though, you need two different criteria. You need it to be a date within the same state fiscal year, but a previous month. And then the miles must be shown as a negative value. And when that happens, the entire row will be highlighted in red, which doesn't mean it's a mistake. It just means it's being counted negatively, which is actually what's being desired. So I'll do an example of that. You kind of saw it on the bus pass, but you know, we're in August. If we wanted to take back a bus pass from a previous month, we would just enter that previous month and it gets shaded red. So for ambulatory, let's do that again. So it's yellow because I still need to make the miles negative. But once I make the miles negative, shades it red. And remember, we had 946 trips. So when we had an error, this was 945 trips, but now it's being counted as a negative trip. So it's actually 944. So that's how that credit works. And again, it's reflected over here as well. Going back, I guess, before I actually finish on the dates and times, I'll just give, I forgot about the dates. I need to give a common example. So if the date is actually correct, in this case, you know, we're looking at, you know, it's the month of August for our services. So an August date in 2021 is correct. You actually have a lot of flexibility in terms of how this works. So I'll say, what is it? August 2nd, 2021. It'll automatically pick that up, you know, it'll convert it. That's not really an issue. On the time here, it converts it to this look, but if you'll notice from the file I actually copied and pasted from, the time is in military time. So It doesn't matter if you type military time or you type, the way it's laid out there. This is interesting as well. If you don't say PM, if you just say P, it'll pick that up as well. So there's some flexibility there. What's an example of where there's not flexibility? So there's certainly some CTCs where for their date, they'll say live at the end after the date. That's something that would need to be worked through. It's not going to realize that as a date format. Another example would be, I think I've only seen this with one CTC, but you'll have the year, and then you'll have the month, and you'll have the day, and it'll just be one string. It won't have any slashes or dashes or anything like that. It's not able to pick that up as well. So that's something that would need to be worked through as well. And if there's any help needed with that, we can absolutely help with that. So, yeah, that's.
Yeah, so there's been some questions, and what we can do, I can go through these questions that were entered in the chat, and we can try to answer those, or in some cases, maybe we need to provide some later feedback.
Okay.
But I can go through these and however we want to discuss them. And perhaps.
Would you prefer to stand up and up there, or?
Probably, if everybody can hear me okay, what we'll do is, Casey, if you stay there, I think it might just be showing some how the functionality works. And that way, I'll announce who has asked this question, and if you want that person wants to unmute, then, yeah, just click your microphone button on within GoToMeeting at the bottom of your screen, and you can unmute and further explain your question if we don't answer it the way you had anticipated. But I think that will help get some dialogue going, and we'll get through the questions. So the first question, I'm actually going, it was about group, and because we initially said that we did not reside that as one of the trips, the trip types, and the question was, so is group going away? And in terms of the answer to that, that was how we were instructed to create this. And David, I don't know if you want to provide some background on that, or is that?
I don't know if one of our team can maybe elaborate. My understanding was it was not a field that was, or rate that was really utilized, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
There were only 3 counties.
Yeah.
In the most recent year.
I think there was a combination of that it wasn't utilized very often, and then I think there was some confusion between the group versus the group by passenger. So I think this is a way to kind of eliminate the confusion, and also it just never really was fully utilized. So it didn't seem to have a major financial incentive or something justifiable for us to continue keeping. But I also don't want to speak out of turn. So if there's someone from the CTD team who's on that wants to elaborate on that answer, that was kind of my recollection.
So short answer, yes, that's the plan as of this point, is to eliminate the group service reimbursement. But you could still do group by passenger.
Correct. Okay. Next question. This was, will the types of services provided be specific to, might be a typo there, be specific to each jurisdiction. Collier provides more types of services than noted in the example. So I think we're talking about ambulatory, wheelchair, stretcher, and group or passenger. Are there different services beyond that? And this is from Michelle Arnold. Michelle, you may want to unmute your microphone there, and you can elaborate on that if you like.
If you can hear me, it's essentially the same answer that you just gave about the group, because we provide group trips, and you all said you're going to be eliminating that.
Okay.
I will just add to that question though. So in terms of the the different tabs you have for the trips, you have a lot of examples where under the mode column and it's especially the case with ambulatory, but you'll have at least somewhere in your system, a CTC has different codes for different types of ambulatory trips, and I'm not exactly sure how that works or anything, but that's going to still be allowed. The only thing it's really looking for in this column here is whether there's any text at all. So it's not going to get hung up on anything like that.
Okay. The next question dealt with the recovery of the previous month's services. And the question was, how do we provide backup if it causes an error? And I think that question was asked before you. I showed how the previous months, if you have a previous month entry. I don't know if that answered the question. This was from Paul Strobus.
We're talking about this, right? The bottom part.
Yeah, I believe so. But if you enter those trips in on the sheet, it would cause an error for the prior month. But you showed how it, if it's entered in as a negative, it reduces that and allows that trip. It counts it. It just identifies it as a previous trip.
So we'll follow up on that, because that's probably the most confusing part of all this when you start getting with the credits and the recovering the previous billing. But yeah, I think Jeff has the right answer on that, but we'll follow up to make sure that that's clear.
Paul, are we getting to what the meat of your question is? And you can unmute and elaborate.
Yeah, so basically what I was trying to ask was, if a CTC has more trips in a month that exceeds the drawdown amount, and then for whatever reason, and we had it happen last year with COVID, obviously, when our ridership cut down due to COVID in March last year, we were able to apply trips that occurred in February, January, December to that March invoice to draw down all the units. If I add trips in this invoice format now for previous months, it's going to be an error. Your example of putting a negative is to remove something from a previous month, but we're not allowed to actually include any overbilling trips in the backup for those months. So that's where I'm trying to figure out, is how do we add it to this as a billable unit in any one month?
Okay, well, that's a good question, and I guess the simplest tweak would be we'd allow anything up to that month within the same state fiscal year.
Yeah,
but that might raise some other concerns on our end, but we'll work on that.
Yeah, that's a good point. We'll have to take that into.
But I mean, just technically speaking, yeah, you could just allow for any month that has already occurred in the state fiscal year to be counted.
Okay.
But we'll talk about that more.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Paul. Next, this is a comment more than a question. It says the miles need to be flagged for a 0 mile also. Do we account for that, Casey, as opposed to not just the rounded amount, but the actual? So it was 0.3. It would round down to 0 technically.
So 0 gets basically, yeah, you'll see it. I just made it 0 and it highlighted the row yellow.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I said 0.3, I think it would still count it because it's adding them all up and rounding at the end.
Yes. There we go.
Yeah, so 0 does make the row highlighted and the trip count taken away. Even just a 1/10 of a mile, though, will allow it to be counted.
Yep. Yeah, the rounding occurs of the sum total for all trips, so it will be flagged if it's a 0 mile entered in there.
Yeah, so the way the miles are tallied, just to reiterate what Jeff's saying, you add them all up just as they're entered. At the very end, they're rounded to the nearest mile, the total.
All right. Next question. Are all bus passes reported on one tab? The previous form had separate tabs for each type of bus pass.
Yeah, we'd like to actually do that moving forward. To be honest, you could actually put all the trips under one tab too and just have the mode be different. But because of the example I gave earlier, how you'll have different types of codes for different trips, we want to keep those separated for now. But when it comes to the bus passes, we think it's just a lot easier to just really have the mode there, tally up, keep track of what kind of pass it is. We don't see a need for separate tabs there. If there's a desire to keep separate tabs for different passes, we'll absolutely listen to that though.
Okay.
Good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are good comments, helpful. Next question, will the backup sheets, e.g. Ambulatory wheelchair, stretcher, et cetera, be unlocked, meaning they're editable? I had an issue exporting Excel data from Trapeze and pasting it into workbook a few times due to version issues because the entire workbook was password protected. I had to run a script in Excel in order to edit or paste them into exported data.
So this is actually what I just did where I copied and pasted the data. It's actually locked, but it allows you in all the cells underneath, the column headers to actually edit them or paste into them. You'll see I'm trying to go up. I can't go up into the header, and I can't go right of any of the headers as well. But yeah, all this stuff is editable. But what it does is when you're pasting, it's making sure it's pasted in a way that it converts it to the correct format.
Yeah, so when you paste, if you bring it in and paste in a format that's different than what it's looking for, it's going to flag it or highlight it.
So not necessarily.
Okay.
If it can convert it, like the examples I gave at the very end, you might type your date differently, right? You might literally type out August 2nd, 2021. You might have dashes where there are slashes here. It'll recognize that and it'll convert it to the slash method. Same thing with the time. You might do military time, which was actually the case with the data we pasted here. You might just say, P. Doesn't matter, it'll recognize that. But if it's not able to recognize it, it will highlight it yellow.
So yeah, there may be some need to format your exports from the software that you use to try to get it into the, so that the columns used here on the invoices are consistent with that export. As Casey mentioned, there's some flexibility into the formatting that you pull in. But yeah, there may be some need to do that. And if during that process you have difficulty, then we'll assist however we can.
Yep.
Okay. Next question. We are one of the CTCs that has live at the end of the date. Based on the example shown, it reads as an error. Is there a way of eliminating it in the spreadsheet, or do we have to delete it from our end before we copy and paste it on the spreadsheet?
So I'll follow up with you specifically. There's a really easy way to take that out in the spreadsheet. You can do either, but we're happy to provide you, the formula to take out live and make it an automatic date. But it's good to hear from that. I thought about that one specifically.
Yeah, and yep, I think that answers it. But yeah, just to reiterate that, there's a formula within Excel that you can use that it will automatically go in there and remove that from that import. Next question, comment. Thank you. Eliminating group per group is actually helpful and will simplify the billing process. So that's good feedback. Thank you for that. Karen Smith, you may need to help me with this. This says supplemental invoice for past trips. Is that a recommendation?
So I think that's similar to the question that was asked earlier. If we want to include trips from a previous month.
Yeah, how do you do that?
How do we do that, or can we do that? And we'll talk about that. But in terms of the technical tweak, we would just allow any month that's already occurred in the existing state fiscal year to be counted.
Karen Smith, if you want to unmute, if you want to elaborate on that, is that the same?
Actually, what I was saying is I think that's how we've handled it last year, is if we needed to bill for previous month's trips, you did this month's, you did the normal month's invoice, and then you did a supplemental invoice separately with that month, so then it wouldn't create that error because the date range would be correct.
Right, okay. Yeah, we'll talk that over a little bit more and come up with some more specific guidance on that, and work with TD staff on that so that it's clear. Okay. Next question, what if you have trips that should have been TD trips and still have room to bill for that prior month, in other words, correcting an error? Not sure. I think that might be the negative that we've talked through.
Read it again.
Joanne Granger, if you'd like to.
No, that's if you find out that you have trips that should have been billed as TD trips, so they weren't included in the prior invoice. but they were TD trips and you need to get reimbursed for those.
Okay.
I think that,
It's the other side, the positive side.
Yeah, right. So that sounds like a similar issue where we've got trips outside of the billing period that need to be somehow addressed. So we'll consider that as well.
Yep.
In that further guidance. Thank you for that. Okay, and then the last question that we have in here is, could you add a flag in the final column in addition to the highlight? When you have thousands of rows, it'd be easier to filter the errors. So this is one thing we talked about, potentially maybe exporting those errors to a separate tab and being able to filter them.
no, they're just talking about like one more, if I understand it correctly, just one more column.
Yeah.
Like, so for instance, here, like right to the right of Miles,
Yeah,
and if it's highlighted, it would say something like error,
yeah.
and then you could just filter all the errors.
Oh, Travis, this was your question. Is that
That's
satisfying?
exactly, yeah, that's exactly what I was hoping for, because right now I can, in the miles area, I look for 0 miles to make sure that there's no bad data in the trip, so I can filter out all the 0 trips. If you were able to do like an extra column that if there's an error that generates the condition of the highlight, put a 1, and then we could just change the filter at the top of that column to show all the 1s. It'd be easier to find them all versus scrolling through 10,000 rows to find highlighted.
Yeah, we'll absolutely add that.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Good question.
Good questions.
Yeah, those are good things. So that is all the questions that we had in the chat box. I don't know if there's any others that might be out there. If you do, the easiest way really to coordinate this is to just say, hey, I've got something to say in the chat so I can call on you. But if there's anybody else with comments, now's a good time. We appreciate this feedback. It's very helpful.
Yeah, and I'll just add real quick, the template as well as the PowerPoint will be posted to the CTD website after today, as well as a recording of this tutorial.
Okay, so the next question just popped in is, when will this new workbook go out and to whom? I think we're getting into the next steps of this. So,
Yeah.
You want
David, if you want to.
Sure.
to?
No, just like what Casey had said, this was really just designed to kind of be an introduction tutorial. So we are going to, as you mentioned, post this template out onto the website, as well as the recording, and any of those who either have additional thoughts, you can either email me or the project manager in your area, or we will look forward to seeing what other additional feedback for those who couldn't attend, who are listening to the recording. You're also welcome to provide us additional thoughts, questions, or feedback on this. And I believe we're going to implement this starting July 1st. So this is for the new fiscal year. This will be fully implemented. So this is the time now to try to get these thoughts and these questions answered. So by July 1st, this will be live in the new form.
Yeah, and David, one thing we talked about was potentially maybe beta testing this with one or two or a small group of CTCs, yes, so that we can kind of work out some of these bugs in the real world, in the live environment. So we'll do that as well once we've got some of these other questions addressed. Okay.
I think that's all very good questions. I appreciate on a Friday morning everybody who's attended and engaged in this. Are there any other final thoughts before we close?
Silent on the chat, so I'm going to take that as everybody's good for now, and we look forward to moving forward with this and getting a final product everybody can use. All right.
Great. Well, everyone have a great weekend. Just for announcements, we will be holding a different separate workshop on the ADA issue on May 7th, and we'll have our commission meeting on June 3rd, just for upcoming events. Everybody have a great rest of your weekend. Take care.
Thank you.